Splines are the ultimate free-form curve tool. Smooth, flowing shape and wild curves are the result. However, be careful. Splines are very difficult to relay on drawings, and manufacturing is more of an issue. Sometimes the best choice is to use a spline as a layout sketch for traditional arcs to get the best of both worlds. Let's jump into SOLIDWORKS and create some splines. The spline tool here, click on that. Now, splines are created through a series of points. So if I click on the origin, for instance, my very next point is going to be where my curve is going to bend. So I'm going to click here, and notice as I now control the end point of that, and if I'm close or far, depending how far away I am, that shape's going to change. So it's going to be defined through a series of points. Generally, my finding is that if you put less points, it makes it better. So I'm going to put a point down here, and notice as I change that, the entire shape changes. As I drag that through, it's controlling not only the point that I'm dragging, but also the rest of the curve and that shape. And I'm further away from it. It does a lot of different motion changes and stuff like that. As I get closer to it, I make a more sharp curve at the end. Then one more click down here. And it's going to continue that way as I click and drag points. As soon as I hit escape, it stops at that last segment of the line. Now I can click on any one of these points to define that curve. So I can click on this end point here and drag it around if I wanted to. Same thing over here. I can click on that point, drag that around, drag this one around. Now notice as I'm dragging these around, I get these couple arrows that kind of pop up right here. Now these are control handles. So if I can drag these out a little further, I can push them in, I can twist, change the shape using these controls, and I can pull it in and out or go to the other side. And notice I have one of these at each one of my starting points. So this is a direction vector and how much influence is. So the longer that arrow is, it's the more influence it has on that curve. The shorter is the less. And the same thing with the angle or the vector that's starting at. So that's the control points. If I select this entire spline, under the tools palette up here, I can go down. I have a whole bunch of tools that I can use to control that spline. So I can add tangency, I can have curvature, I can insert points, I can simplify it. A lot of times you have too many points. I can actually get rid of some of those points and make it a little bit smoother curve. I can show the curves, I can show a control polygon. I'm not going to go through all these. The couple that I'm going to show this polygon. And that's the shape that now I can drag this around more as like a polygonal shape that I can grab these control points here and move these things around to define it inside of those. And same thing, now these vectors are kind of attached at the beginning and end along that polygon and through these points. So each one of those points we have there. Same thing if I want to go select that line, and I can go to the spline tools and go in here and I can insert another point. So if I wanted a point right here, for instance, now I have a little bit more control to drag that part of that spline around. If I take this spline and I try to go manufacture a part from this or use this out to dimension it, you can think about it, it'd be very difficult to define where this is. And I try to put some dimensions on here. I can dimension from maybe from this point to that point, which would be fine. But how do I define the shape out here? How do I define this section of that curve? Those are going to be very difficult to relay on a drawing to anybody else. So, and same thing, if it goes out to manufacturing and you're trying to machine this part or bend this part or something like that, that's going to be very difficult to relay. So the last thing I'm going to show here is an overlay of regular arcs. I'm going to place this originally as a construction. It's going to be our helper spline. So I'm going to take a 3-point arc now. I'm going to start here. I'm just going to kind of drag this out. And then I'm going to use my little 3-point arc to define that shape a little bit or get close to that shape if I wanted to. If this is not the right shape, which looks like it's not really right here, I can actually start with a line here. Start with a line, and then we'll use more of like a tangent arc. So here's my arc, and I'm going to place that along that line, right? And then I can continue placing those arcs along that spline and use it kind of as a helper. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same, but we can make a bunch of short arcs that are going to be very, very similar to that spline shape. As you can see, I've got kind of a curve here, and I can go in here and fine tune those a little bit, and I can drag them closer to the line or do like a best fit. So you're not going to get exactly the same shape as a spline, but depending on how much time you want to spend on it and how you want to move those little curves around to define that shape, you can get a pretty nice shape to define your spline. And then each one of those arcs can be defined with a radius, a center point, and a start and end point. Splines have many great features and are wonderful for smooth curves and complex shapes. However, use them with caution. Dimensioning, defining, and building parts that were designed with splines can be very complicated.